Welcome back in. It's your lucky day because we're going to tell you a little bit about investment planning, and we've been talking about money. Of course we have, because that's what we do when Phil Bloyd is in the studio, and we're always glad to have you.
All right.
Before we went to break, we promised we were going to talk a little bit about investment goals and really how to maybe safeguard some goals that you might have. So it's tricky to do both, but we're going to do that. So let's start with really talking about, what we are trying to accomplish. So why is it so important to ask yourself, what's the end game? What's the long game? What's the accomplish?
Because of the markets we're in right now, and if I'm retired, and I go back to 2008, 9, and maybe my memory's not as familiar with that because it was a long time ago, but I'm retired now. So let's say, for example, back in 2008 and 9, I was working still. And we had this huge sell-off in the market. And it took about 5 years just to get back to even because we were in a nasty bear market.
Yes.
So many of our retirees today have forgotten that. Because they're like, well, I got through that fine or whatever, but maybe you weren't retired yet.
Right.
So you still were working, you had income coming in, you were contributing to your 401k, you had money going in at every paycheck. Well, now it's different.
Yes.
So what we had mentioned earlier was kind of checking our portfolio to make sure that, we didn't have too much risk. But we're saying, okay, if we don't do too much in risk on the risk side, if we want to take a lower risk or we want to protect our principal, how can we get a better gain from that side of things?
Yeah, and that's really what a lot of folks should be asking themselves right now is how do we safely earn more without feeling like we're overexposed or risking too much? Is there a way to do that?
Well, if I save an expense, would you say that is earning more, kind of?
Yeah, you wind up with more income, more money to spend, right?
So the thing we would want to do, first of all, is we want to tighten up things a little bit. If we're spending too much in income or if we're doing withdrawals that we don't need, we want to pull back on that somewhat until the market kind of straightens out. If I'm taking monies from higher taxable assets, maybe I want to take them from lower taxable. Maybe I have too much cash in the bank. I've already paid taxes on that money, so maybe I would want to take withdrawals from that before I take it from my IRA. And so we want to save in taxes too. But the other thing we might could do is we say, okay, we know that you're always watching the TV and they're talking about, the treasury rate's 3% or 2.9 on a 10-year, on a 30-year, on a 5-year. Normally, the longer that we go on a asset where there's low risk or no risk, the higher return. So we may consider, instead of doing a 2-year term on something, we may go 5. Instead of 5, we may go 10.
Okay.
So that would help us to get a better rate of return on that asset without taking more of a risk. So that's one thing.
Okay, so that's way number one. That's a good, great tip, actually. So just increasing the
longer,
length.
right?
Yeah. Okay.
Especially when I'm retired because I'm not saving anymore. Okay. The other thing we might do, let's go back to the tax thing for just a second. So we said earlier in the show, when you call in, let's look at your tax return.
Yes.
I'm not an accountant. I don't want to redo your tax return. But your tax return is history.
Yeah.
So if we don't change anything, it's probably going to look the same next year as it did this year or last year. So the idea would be, let's look at that. Let's see what's causing taxation. It could be where you're taking the income from, as I mentioned before. You could be taking it from an IRA and you're paying income taxes. And I'm like, well, how much do you have in your emergency fund in the bank? And you might say, well, I've got 12 months expenses. And I'm like, well, you're only supposed to have 6. So let's skip taking the withdrawals from the IRA now, and let's take it from that excess cash you have in the bank because you've already paid taxes on that.
That's such a great tip. When we started this show, Phil, I didn't realize, honestly, how big of a role taxes played in your income, because there are so many ways that you can just really avoid having extra fees and extra taxes that do play such an important role in how much you have left and how much you're able to invest. So that's a really important pointer. Okay, we got one more segment for you here on Lowcountry Money Talk, so we're going to wrap this all up for you and make sure we can close it out strong. And we're going to do that after this break. Stick with us.